Hi everybody, Vigorous Rapscallion here with another VR Labs episode. Today in episode 2 we're going to be talking about the basics of VR inputs. We're going to be seeing how to implement those in scripts, and we're going to be doing a little basic demonstration for you today. So as I said in the last video, we're going to be doing finger guns. As you can see, I've got a little gun range set up here, so let's hop in and see what that looks like. So here we are at my little gun range, but one thing we seem to be missing is guns. I don't see any anywhere. Luckily, I've got my trusty finger guns with me, so we can use those to hit these targets. All you gotta do is make some finger guns to pull them out, then move your thumb down like it's the hammer of a gun to fire. Now, these aren't totally magic. They do have a limited number of bullets. As you can see, after 6, I've run out and I need to reload. So I do that by pressing the grip button. Now, I can shoot 6 shots again. To put the guns away, I simply move my index finger closer to the trigger. And we have the same functionality with our left hand. Setting this up is actually going to be a lot simpler than you think. It's going to be a piece of code that's only about 12 lines long. So without further ado, let's get started. So where are we going to find some information about the inputs we want to deal with? Well, we already have these 2 scripts attached to our custom hands that deal with all the inputs we want to check out. We've got this OVR grabber script and this hand script. Let's check out the hand script real quick because that has everything we want to deal with. So what are we looking for in this script? Well, we're looking for things that deal with input. And in virtual reality, we use an input method called OVRInput. Let's go ahead and take a look for some of these in this line of script here. Looks like we've got a few lines that involve OVRInput. Let's take a closer look at one of them. We've got M is pointing, so that sounds like it's a Boolean related to whether or not the character is pointing. Is not equal to this line of code here. So this is just setting up a Boolean, a true or false state, based on this line of code, and it's going to resolve to the opposite of what it resolved to. So what are we looking at here? Well, we've got OVRInput.get. Just like the normal input method, there are quite a few things you could put there. It doesn't have to be get. It can be get down, get up, get access raw. And all of those are going to work the same in a virtual reality setup as they do in standard Unity. So the different reasons you would use the different ones hold true for your VR projects. Now, if you don't know a lot about inputs yet, don't worry, keep watching. We're going to be dealing with them a lot, and you'll pick it up as we go along. So after that, we've got this parenthetical statement. So when you use the get method, it's going to resolve to true or false based on what's in these parentheses here. So then we've got OVRInput again to tell the computer what input system we're dealing with. Then we've got a near touch. So this is the type of event we're looking for. This could be an axis, as it is up here. It could be a button, or it could be a near touch. Near touch is specific to VR, which is why I used it. This is just checking if the player is almost touching that button or is touching that button but has not yet begun to press it down. After that, we have a reference to the button in question, which is the primary index trigger. Then we've got a comma and M controller. M controller is just a variable that this script uses to store a reference to what controller the script is currently on. We're not going to worry about that in this video. What I do want to talk about is this primary that's in both of those. Primary actually refers to which controller it is, and primary in this context will be left. Secondary will be right. So if you wanted the same script but you only wanted it to work for the right controller, you would simply replace that primary with secondary and have secondary index trigger. So this all looks pretty simple. It looks pretty much how inputs work in normal Unity. So let's go ahead and start writing our code and see if everything works the same. So now that we've got all the information we need to be dangerous, it is time to start writing our script. Let's go ahead and go to our scripts folder, make a new C# script, and let's call this Fingergun R. Now, the R is because the first one we're writing is going to be for the right hand. So let's go ahead and get that script open. Now we know from looking at the other script that we're going to need some booleans here to run through the logic chain. So what do we need? We need one to know if we're pointing. So that's a private bool. Let's call it isBarrel, because that represents the barrel of our gun. Then we need one to tell us if your thumb is up or down. Let's call that isHammer. And then we're going to need one to tell us what's going on with the grip of the gun. So we're going to call that one isGrip. Now, are we going to need anything else? Well, let's see. We're going to need ammo, definitely. The gun has ammo. So we're going to need a public integer, and this will be set in the inspector to tell us how much ammo we have when our ammo is full. Then a private integer to tell us how much ammo we have right now. Okay, so just like in the other code there, the first thing we want to do is get a reference to all of these booleans. We want to set these first to make sure that the logic stays consistent as it runs through everything else that needs to happen in that particular update tick. So let's start with isBarrel. Now we know that's going to be related to whether or not the character or the player's finger is near to the trigger. So we're going to need OVRInput .get, because this is just going to resolve to true or false. We don't need a number. The system we're using is OVRInput. And the type of event we need is a near touch. Just like Axis, we also have raw. We're going to use near touch in this case because get will make it automatically resolve to true or false, regardless of if it's an integer or not. Then dot. And remember, we're doing the right hand first for this one. So we're actually going to want the secondary index trigger for our near touch. You'll notice we don't have a lot of options here because there are only 2 near touch sensors. So we've got any, none, or the 4 you have between the 2 controllers. In this case, we want the secondary index trigger. Now, we don't need to tell it what controller it is because we put the secondary keyword in there. So this line of code is done. Next, we want to do isHammer. And this is going to be the same thing, but we're just going to be checking the secondary thumb button. So let's go ahead and just copy our code down. Delete index trigger. And replace it with secondary thumb buttons. There you go. So we've got our isBarrel and our isHammer resolving. However, we have a little problem here. These resolve in sort of the opposite way we want them to. This will resolve to true when the player is touching the trigger or almost touching the trigger. So just like they did in the example, we want to put an exclamation point in there to flip that. So now this will resolve to true when the character is pointing, and if we do the same thing down here, this will resolve to true when the character has their thumb up like a hammer. The last one we need is isGrip. This one's going to be a little simpler and a little more familiar because we're just going to be using this like a button. Dot button. So this time, rather than near touch, we just use dot button, and then you'll see we have quite a few more options here. But the one we're looking for is a secondary, where is it at? Here we go, secondary hand trigger at the top here. So now this one will resolve to true or false based on if the grip is currently pressed in. We want to leave this one as is because isGrip seems to imply that the person is currently gripping the handle. So we want that to resolve to true when that button is pressed down. Now, before we can fire our finger guns, we need to deploy our finger guns. So that's going to be the first function we deal with. To deploy the finger guns, we need all 3 of these to resolve to true. So if isBarrel is equal to true, and isHammer is equal to true, and isGrip is equal to true. Well, what do we want to happen then? True. When all three of these resolve to true, we want a new Boolean to tell us that our gun is out. So let's call that is guns out. So we want to set that here to true, but we want to set it to false in start. Because at the beginning of the game, we do not want the game to default to our guns being out. So, is guns out equals false in start, and if these three conditions are met, is guns out equals true. Not true. However, we only want the guns to deploy in the case they are not already deployed. So we also want this to only happen in the case that is guns out is currently false. Well, we also need a way to put our guns away. However, we don't want the guns to be put away in the event that is barrel or is grip resolves to false, as those need to resolve to false for our reloading mechanism and our firing mechanism. So the only one we want to deal with is barrel. If the person is to move their index finger back towards the trigger, they are essentially putting the gun away. So if is barrel equals false, is guns out equals false. Well, since all this is happening in code, how are we going to tell that our script is actually executing? We could put a debugging line in here and have it simply debug this is guns out variable, but rather than that, let's just have it play a sound, since we're going to have to do that anyways, and it's a great way to check. First thing we need here outside of update is a function to set and play our audio sources. So we want something that sounds like play but isn't. Let's call it a go sound. That's right, the go sound function, and that needs a clip in reference, an audio clip, and we'll call that audio clip for the purposes of this. Now we're going to need an audio source as well, so let's go ahead and set that up here. And we're just going to call that source gun, because that's what it will be attached to. So we want gun.clip to equal clip, which is the information we're passing into this. And then we want to play that clip, passing in no parameters. Simple as that, and then we're going to need references to our two clips in question. So in this case, we need a sound for pulling the gun out and one for putting it away. Let's call that public audio clip gun out and public audio clip gun in. So let's go ahead and set these in each case to make sure it's working. So we're going to call the go sound method, putting in the gun out noise here. And then we're going to call the go sound method, putting in the gun in noise. Great, let's set this all up in the inspector and make sure it works. One thing I forgot to do before hopping into testing, you want to make sure that this logic chain also checks to make sure that is guns out is currently true. So here we are in the inspector, and we're going to go ahead and take our Fingergun R script, and we're going to apply it to our custom right hand here. Go ahead and do that. Let's take a look at it. There it is. We've got our ammo setting here, which we're going to set to 6. Then we need an audio source, which is the audio source I have attached to the custom right hand here. Just drag that in. Then we need a gun out sound. Now, one thing I did prepare outside of the video was a bullet prefab and the different sounds I will need. So the tutorial's not about sounds, so I didn't include that. We've got this sound here, which is a revolver cocking for the gun to come out, and for the gun to go back in. This is the same sound, but reversed and doctored up a little bit. So with all of that set, everything should work fine in the play mode. Let's go test it out. Okay, so if all went according to plan, we should get the gun out noise when I make a finger gun. There we go. I should be able to move my palm freely and my thumb freely, and it should make the gun going in noise when I move my index finger back to the trigger. There we go. Everything seems to be in working order. Let's move to the next step. So what are the conditions of our gun firing? Well, our gun needs to be out. So if is out is equal to true is one of our conditions. And we also need to make sure that the player has brought their hammer down. They've brought their thumb closer to the controller. Now, is hammer up here actually is going to resolve to false while the player is touching the thumbstick area or is near it. So we want is hammer to be false as our firing condition. However, there's an issue here. If we just leave it like this, every time or while is guns out is true and is hammer is false, it will fire a bullet every single uptake cycle. So we don't want that. We only want it to happen once per press. Now, a really quick and dirty way to switch that over is to just switch this get to get down. And what get down is going to do is go ahead and give us a ping of that state rather than a permanent readout of that state. So now it should only go through the logic chain once and fire the gun once. And lastly, we need to deal with ammo. So if the gun has no ammo, it can't fire. So we need to make sure that current ammo is above 0, is greater than 0. And if all of these conditions are met, then we fire. I already see a few problems with this. We don't know what our current ammo is. It's going to start out as 0 because we haven't set it. So current ammo equals full ammo in start. And then we're going to start in on the firing mechanism. First, we're going to need a prefab to use as our bullet. So we're going to put a public rigid body and call that bullet and assign that in the inspector. And then we need a new rigid body here to serve as that instance of the bullet. So let's call that rigid body this bullet, which will be reset every time this function is called. Now, we want to set this bullet to be equal to an instance of bullet prefab, but also traveling at a certain velocity, having a certain force added to it, and traveling in a specific direction. Now, I've already made a reference in Unity for a transform that's going to represent the end of the fingertip. So I just added this transform gun end into the script, and we're going to set that in the inspector. So that represents the end of our gun. So we're going to go ahead and make this bullet equal to a new instance of the bullet prefab. But there's a few other things we need to set about this. We also need to set the position and rotation, which we can get from the transform that we just added, gun end. So we're going to use gun end dot position and gun end dot rotation. That'll instantiate our bullet, but it'll just kind of be sitting there. So we also need to add a force to this bullet. I'm going to use this bullet.add force. And for add force, we need a vector 3. So we're going to use gun end dot forward. But that'll only have it going with a force of 1, which will be a very slow bullet. So let's multiply the whole thing by 500. Next, we need to subtract 1 from ammo. And we could do that with a simple current ammo minus minus. Lastly, for this shooting method, we need to play our shooting sound. So let's go ahead and add 2 new audio clips. One for the gunshot sound, and one for the reload sound. Great, and we'll set those in the inspector. So we want to go ahead and lastly call goSound and pass in our new gunshot audio clip. That should be all we need there. Now we just need a simple reloading script. Now, we also need our gun out in order to reload it, so that's going to be the first step of this logic as well. If isGunsOut equals true. And we also need the player to press the grip button. So we're going to have to also have isGrip equal to false. What do we need to happen in that case? Well, it's pretty simple. We just need current ammo to equal, I call that variable again, full ammo. And we need our reload sound to play. So we're going to call goSound and pass in our reload sound audio clip. And that should be everything we need to get the functionality I showed you at the start of the video. Let's go ahead and make sure it all works. So we just need to assign a few things in the inspector. We're going to make this gun end a transform that I made earlier, which is simply the end of the person's hand when they're making a finger. Then we need a sound for the gunshot, which I have here, and a reload sound. Now with all that set up, it should work. Nearly forgot to assign the bullet. That's going to be an important part of us being able to shoot. Okay, let's try it out. Okay, so let's make sure everything is in working order. Make the finger guns to deploy, hammer down to shoot. It's coming more or less out of the finger, it's a little off. And then we can only shoot 6 shots, and then we have to reload, and then we can shoot again. That all seems to be working great. If we wanted to apply it to the left hand, it's simply a matter of copying the script, changing the name, and changing all of the secondary inputs to primary inputs. But that's not the best solution, and what if you were dealing with a gun that you actually picked up? Well, you'd want that to work in either hand, and you'd want to make sure that your game knew which hand you were holding it in, so you wouldn't be shooting a gun held in your right hand using your left, for instance. So in the next video, just as I did with my Rec Room tutorials, where I did sort of a basics and then an advanced version of the concept I went over, the next video will be a more advanced version of input controls. We'll be talking about how to change controls based on what you're holding, how to fire guns that you've picked up, how to make sure the game knows what controller you're dealing with, and we'll also deal with some of the finer points of the inputs that I've gone over today. As I said, there are a lot of different reasons to use the different approaches in Unity's input system that take trial and error and just sort of practice to figure out which one works the best for each context. Now, this does actually have a few glitches, this finger gun setup that I have. For instance, when you reload, it reloads instantly, and there should really be a cooldown on that. We want the player to have to wait until the gun reloads. As well as that, it doesn't actually start reloading until you've both released and pressed in the trigger. So we want to fix that as well. I think it would feel a lot better if to reload we brought our hand out, waited for the reload cooldown, and then brought our hand back in. That also allows the opportunity to add a skill-based reload minigame, which I've always been a really big fan of. So we're going to go through all of that in the next video, which will be part 2 for this video. After that, I'm going to be moving on to a video using 0G to demonstrate a little bit about how physics work in Unity and what considerations you should have specifically for VR. If there are any game mechanics you'd specifically like to see explored on this channel, please leave them in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching. Have a nice day.